Hi, this is Mr. West, and today we're doing a Khan Academy tutorial on multiply complex numbers basic. So before we get started, I want to talk about this number I. As we can see here, we have negative 8i times the quantity 12 minus I, and it wants it in complex form. Okay, where a and b are real numbers, but I is not. So what is I? If you haven't learned about this already before this exercise, I is equal to the square root of negative 1. The reason why this came about is because normally when we're thinking about, for example, the square root of negative 16, you're thinking, wait a second, that doesn't make sense because I know 4 times 4, let me divide this, equals 16, and then negative 4 times negative 4 equals 16. There is nothing I can multiply by itself to get me negative 16. It doesn't exist. Well, it doesn't in the real number system, but in the imaginary or complex number system, it does. Imaginary sounds kind of misleading because it makes it seem like it's not an actual thing, but it is. It's just another number system that is outside of the real number system. So let's kind of talk about this right here. So we have I equals square root of negative 1. Okay, so that's the number that we can use to get to these negative roots. For example, if I'm looking at negative 16 over here on my right side now, I can multiply this by 4i times, sorry about that. It would be 4i times 4i. So 4i squared would get me negative 16. So this would be equal to 4i. Okay, so now that we have these negative roots, imaginary numbers are the result of those square roots. Okay, so let's move on to this next concept I need to talk about here is I squared. So I squared is I times I, and that's the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1. So that gives you just negative 1. Anytime you multiply a root by itself, like for example, square root of 5 times square root of 5, you just get what's underneath the square root. And that makes sense because the square root of 25, 5 times 5, equals 5. It's the same thing with these imaginary numbers and negative roots. Okay, so you get the number underneath the square root by itself. So I squared is equal to negative 1, and that's a key concept that we need through this. That was a lot. This is way too short for a complete tutorial on imaginary numbers. If you want to check out some of my other videos, go ahead and check those out. It's a more thorough explanation, but I wanted to give some background on this problem. And what we're going to do with this problem is we are going to first distribute this negative 8i to both those terms inside the parentheses. And we're going to multiply them. So I have negative 8i times 12, and then minus, I'm going to put parentheses here, negative 8i times I, like that. Okay. So let's start with the easier one, which is this left side. So we have negative 8 times 12. That gives me negative 96, and then I. Okay, it's kind of like a variable in this case. If you just have one, it's like a tag. It just stays on there, and we're not going to do anything with it because we can't. It's an imaginary number with a real number, that part of the complex number. And there's not much that we can do besides that, okay? So move on here. First off, I recognize that I have two negatives. That's going to make a positive. And then I have 8. There's no other numbers to multiply it by. And then I have this I times I. We already talked about I times I is going to give me negative 1. So in parentheses, I'm going to put negative 1. Now, what happens? What I would like to do is rearrange this a little bit. So I have the negative 8 in front now. And then I have minus 96i. Okay, and that's my answer. Now, a couple things that are tricky. One, we have two negatives to start. It becomes a positive, and because of the i's, it becomes negative again. So it's like you have to be very careful with these negatives and the imaginary numbers. There's lots of interchanging of that. So be very careful as you do this, but we're going to go ahead and put minus 8 minus 96i. So let's go ahead and write this in. I can't remember if we can just use the negative like this. I think you can. Oops. Negative 8 minus 96, and then there's got to be an I around here somewhere. There it is. All right, let's check if this works. Okay, it did. And moving on to the next one. Okay, more negatives, more i's. We got to be careful, but you'll notice that there's only one I, so this one's actually going to be a little bit easier. We should have started with this one. So we have negative 10 times 13i, and then minus, and then we have the negative 10 times the 9. Okay, really what I like to do personally is I just like to consider this a negative 10 times the negative 9, and then I know it's going to be positive 90. And then if I have imaginary numbers on top of that, then I just adjust from there. But I just wanted to show you like the kind of the long way to think about it. Okay, so yes, we're going to get positive 90 on the right side, and then we have negative 10 times 13i, and that just gives us negative 130i. There's no I times I. We're not going to change it again. Okay, but we can do is rearrange it so the real number is out in front. Okay, just like it has here, minus 130i, and then that's it. That's all we have to it. So we're going to type that in, 90 minus 130i. 90 minus 130i, just like that. All right, next question. Okay, this one has an I that we're multiplying here and an I inside, so just be careful. I'm just taking note of that. So I'm going to distribute here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the 30 times the negative 7. That gives me negative 210 I squared. I'm not doing anything with that I squared yet. I just wanted to write it out first. Then I have a minus 1 times 30i. That gives me minus 30i. Okay, now I'm going to handle that I squared. So that I squared really is a negative 1. Let me go ahead and write that out. So negative 1. I still have that negative 210 there. And then I have minus 30i. There's nothing left to do with that minus 30i. That just kind of stays there. All right, now we need to handle this. We have a negative times negative. That's a positive 210 minus 30i, and that's it. That's all there is to it. That's all we can do. It's kind of like this, and that's why I was saying it's kind of like a tag. When it's just an I by itself, you can't expand it or factor it any further, so it's just going to be 210 minus 30i. Let's type that in. 210 minus 30i. Check it. Moving on to the next question. This is the last one. All right, last one is also one of these good ones where I have to distribute, and we got I squared. So we get negative 9 times 6 is 54. I squared, I'll handle that later. Negative 9 times 8 is negative 72, and then I just have the I. Okay, I squared, let's handle it. So I squared, I know, is negative 54 times, my I squared is actually a negative 1. I'm going to highlight this so you can see that this I squared really just changed to a negative 1. Then I have minus 72i. I already have in this form where the I part, the imaginary part, is second and the real part is first. So I have negative 54 times negative 1. That gives me positive 54 minus 72i, and I'm done. 54 minus 72i, and I'm done. Okay, that's all there is to it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to ask questions in the comment section below if you have any. Also, make sure to check out my other videos on complex numbers and imaginary numbers in the search bar on my main page. And I look forward to seeing you next time right here on Wes Explains Best.